gosh. Okay. Let's now. Oh man, that's frustrating. There we go. Woo! There we go. What a way to start a stream with no audio. But we figured it out. It is back on. Hallelujah. And Jake Branch and Jay Knees. Great to see you guys here. Hope that you are having a good morning, evening, wherever you are at, and that you are doing well. Okay, so say tonight feels a little bit more impromptu because, well, I mean, kind of is. Oh boy, I've had a busy day, but but we are going to have some fun. We're going to have some fun talking about a little bit of Deltarune, talking a lot about urban fantasy, and yeah, hopefully just hopefully have a good time. So, I'm going to already pose this question right here, right now. This will be the question that we're going to come back to by the end of this live stream. And it is this: is Deltarune an urban fantasy story? And I already want to hear from people what their thoughts are on that. I'm pretty certain I know where most people will land right at the beginning of this live stream, but I wonder if we might perceive it differently by the time that we are through. So I want to hear from those people who are already here in the chat. Do you think that Deltarune is an urban fantasy story? If yes, tell me why. If no, tell me why. And I'll post it right here as well, just that way we've got a record of it. Is Deltarune an urban fantasy story? Why? When should we be able to spell Y properly? And Victor the Lore Seeker is here. Woo! Great to see you here. All right. Now then, to give people a little bit of time to respond, I will already bring up an update on how things are going for the Deltarune analyses videos, as I promised I would do them. Yes, they are coming, and and it's still going to take a little while, because one of the reasons why the live stream is happening tonight rather than usually on Fridays, because I will be out of town. I'm going to celebrate a friend's birthday, and then after that, it's nose back to the grindstone for everything else. Going back to work at the beginning of next week. So with everything that I have on my plate, unfortunately, things go way slower now than they did before I got a job and before I basically became a part-time babysitter for my niece as well. So when you put together a part-time job plus then part-time babysitting when I get home, that then means that I don't have as much time as I once did for doing videos. And on top of that, I got to get my books going. This YouTube channel, for all the fun that it is, for the great connections and the opportunities it brings, being able to interact with you guys and all of that, which is awesome. This was all born out of writing my own stories. How can I claim to be a novice author doing his shtick and bringing to you guys insights from my own experiences if I'm not writing? So writing also has to happen, which then cuts into whatever little time is left over. And then there's the videos. So that's basically it. For anyone who's like, ooh, should I get into the YouTube gig? If you absolutely want to, let me then just say, go ahead, have at it. Just know that you are not going to have as much time as you wished you would. And ain't that the truth? Okay. So that being said, let's see here if anyone, let's hear, what have you guys posted? Woohoo, the disciple of Toby Fox himself is back at it again. Yes, indeed I am. Victor says, I'd say that Deltarune would be a low fantasy genre. Okay, so let's actually start picking apart a little bit of what you said right there, Victor. And then Stormcrow says, I put Deltarune in the same genre as Stephen King's Lit, only with more obvious magic. Now then, so let's start having a look at what you guys have said. Let's dissect those answers. So what exactly is low fantasy? And is low fantasy itself a genre? Or is it perhaps a subgenre? One of the things that we're going to see tonight is that there's a lot of splitting the hairs, as it were, on some of these topics and for some of these questions and their answers. So you have the large umbrellas of fiction and nonfiction. Under that, then come okay. So we've got historical, we've got romance, drama, thriller, mystery, fantasy, science fiction. There are people who would love to just smash fantasy and science fiction together. However, there's enough to differentiate the two of them that fantasy and sci-fi remain separate even to this day. Those are your genres. Then when you start having a look at, for instance, fantasy itself, and let's say, Victor, you say low fantasy, is low fantasy itself a genre or is it a subgenre? And if it's a subgenre or a genre, how do we know exactly what is low fantasy? And the same goes to you, Stormcrow. What is the same genre of Stephen King's literature? Say, Stephen King does actually quite a bit. A lot of people don't know that he does little friendly kids books. Mostly he's known for his horror stories. Also, a lot of his horror stories are mysteries as well. But not every mystery is a horror, and not every horror is a mystery. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because the moment that people start trying to put a story into a box under a specific category, you come to realize really quickly that it's a whole lot harder to say definitively, it is this one thing. It could very easily be that thing, but with appendages or connections to a whole lot of other categories. And that's important to understand. In the case of any, wait, is this live? Yes, I'm Omega. We are live. It's important to understand the nuances in genre, because especially if you are going to be a creator who's out there selling your wares, selling your stories, you need to know what they are in order to properly market them. Because if you're writing a rom-com, that rom-com should not be in the thriller section. It should not be in the mystery section. And even though there might be plenty of drama, it does not belong in the drama section. It will go into the romance section, or it could end up in the teen section if you're putting it there for the teens. Or does it go off over into the weird comedy corner of the bookstore? That's what that and as weird as weird as it might sound, be like, well, Lars, it is whatever it is. Trust me, whatever you decide to label your book as will determine a lot of where it ends up. One of my books that's hanging out in the local library is down at the bottom shelf in the adult fiction section. And it probably shouldn't be there, but that's where it's been designated to. And part of that is because at the time I didn't appreciate just how important it was to properly designate what my story was. Another thing is that by understanding what your story is from the beginning helps you to better understand what kinds of tropes you're playing into, what the audience expects, how you can subvert that stuff, how you can play into it, how you can twist expectations to your advantage, or knowing the tried and true stuff that is just going to make people absolutely giddy if they see it. By understanding what something is from the get-go, you're as a creator, you're better able to utilize all the tools that are at your disposal. Or you can then better research what kinds of tools that you have to make your story. But when it comes to something like Deltarune, which has been made by Toby Fox, not by any of us, What exactly does it really matter? I mean, Deltarune is Deltarune. Duh. The reason why it matters is because sometimes sometimes our takeaways and our analyses, as beneficial as they might be to us personally, could also be a little bit misleading and take us down a road where suddenly we don't really know what we're talking about, what we're looking at anymore. For instance, when I talked about that Toby actually took the girl next door trope and turned it on its head to turn Susie, the classroom bully, into the girl next door, he 100% did. And the amazing thing is, I claimed that back before we got chapters 3 and 4. And chapters 3 and 4, even more so, solidify that Susie is the girl next door, which is incredible. And we can talk about that if you guys wish. But Stormcrow says, you are right. The thing with Deltarune Undertales is essentially, in my view, it depends on the perspective of the player. Depending on what each focus on in the game, it could be a horror or a genre, or a drama, not a genre, a horror or a drama, or a teen rom-com, or a mystery, or an existential horror if you do the Snowgrave route. But here's the thing. What if it was all of those? Because it is. I mean, think about it for a moment. We have a scheme sprawling across hometown to kidnap and sacrifice people. That is insane. We've got characters planning murder or attempting outright murder. So we definitely have the mystery and the thriller aspect happening. Obviously, there is fantasy. Then, of course, there's the teen rom-com stuff. We've got Noelle hard crushing on Susie. We've got Chris very interested in Susie. We got Susie trying to figure out what her feelings are in all of this. We've got Ralsei going all blushy if anyone even hints at something romantic. We've got Caddy who's gunning for Susie's throat because she's jealous that Noelle is more interested in Susie than in her. So there's your teen rom-com stuff, and there is comedy all throughout that. We have the drama of a divorced family and of a largely broken family with the holidays after losing Des. The split family of the Dreamers with Asgore and Toriel getting divorced, going their separate ways. And we see how that's had an effect not just on the Dreamer family, but on the entire town. There's absolutely a drama element to this as well. And then the existential horror, again, if you decide to go down the Snowgrave route, or if you're even paying attention to what Chris is going through when it comes to the soul. Holy cow, there's so much going on. So what is Deltarune? Honestly, what I would argue is that it falls under the grandiose umbrella of fantasy. And one of the things that a lot of people have a hard time with, especially in the day and age where we're so obsessed with slapping labels on everything and cramming everything into its specially designated box, is that when it comes to stories, especially, stories can pull on all kinds of elements and bring them together to tell what it needs to tell, to help the characters go on the journey that they need to go on to become who they are meant to be by the end of it, as well as take us on our own journey. So that's basically my grandiose claim right here to better understanding Deltarune. But urban fantasy. Why urban fantasy? Well, I'll tell you why we're talking about urban fantasy tonight. So that's because Shade, now, let's see here, 2 weeks ago, requested that we do a lesson on how to write urban fantasy. So that is what tonight's going to be all about. How to write urban fantasy. And as I was putting together this lesson, I thought, you know what? I think it's very beneficial for us to ask this question. Could something like Deltarune be urban fantasy? Because obviously it's fantastical, but there's all these other elements to it. But it's also a story that, and I haven't seen anyone point this out yet, It doesn't happen in a city. In case you're wondering, urban equals city. Suburbs, they are city adjacent. And then rural is outside of the city. And very clearly, going back to chapter 1 of Deltarune, Toriel brings up if she thinks that Azrael's going to feel okay coming back to the little old hometown after he's been to college in the big city. So just by looking at the word urban alone, it seems like we can easily just wash our hands of this whole question and say, we're done here. We're done. There, of course, this is an urban fantasy because it doesn't happen in a city. Well, this is where our lesson comes in order to better understand this subgenre of fantasy. Because fantasy is the big umbrella that all these other things are under, where you have just your typical fantasy, you've got high fantasy, you've got low fantasy, which is nothing's really fantastical except for a couple of elements here and there. You've got portal fantasy, you've got urban fantasy, you've got dark fantasy or grimdark fantasy. You've got sci-fi, so sci-fi fantasy where things are a little bit more scientific in nature as far as the magic or the fantastical is concerned. There's all these different ways that you can take fantasy in all these different directions. So where is Deltarune going? That is the question that I hope that we can answer by the end of this lesson. Let me take a drink of water here. Good water. All right. Let me bring up the slideshow. I quickly go on over here into my documents and pull it on up. I think this is one of the fastest nights we've ever gotten to the lesson itself. But hey, we're not going to be wasting any time tonight. All right, here we go. How to write urban fantasy. So our goal for tonight, aside from answering the question of whether or not Deltarune is urban fantasy, we want to understand the potential inherent within the subgenre of urban fantasy and learn the different approaches, the hidden world and the merged world. So a quick gripe from Lars is this. I personally have a hard time with urban fantasy stories because I feel it's too restrictive. And often the genre is nothing more than a spicy setting for generic and angsty teen dramas or dystopian storylines. And while there's honestly nothing wrong with a good angsty teenage romance drama story, or even with a dystopian story, the thing is that basically, in my opinion, what's happened to urban fantasy is the same thing that's happened to isekai. That one or two ideas were really popular at one point, and so everyone is trying to copy what has been done before without inventing, without innovating within that genre, within that subgenre. And as a result, it's become stale and repetitive. When you watch any isekai, when you read any isekai, you already know what you're getting into. In fact, it's refreshing when an isekai doesn't have a harem. It's refreshing when an isekai doesn't have stupid video game mechanics. And yet the thing is that just simply omitting those doesn't make them a good story. In fact, many of isekai that decide to omit those things are still poorly written. Gah! So what we're aiming for as creators to be innovative. We want to be able to understand, again, what the subgenre, what the genre is that we're working with in order for us to make the most out of it, if that's the story that we want to write, or if that's the sandbox that we want to play in. And urban fantasy is a fantastic sandbox, which unfortunately has just been crapped in by a bunch of really lazy stories. Hey there, Shade. Hey, Shade, you are finally here for a lesson that you requested. Stormcrow says, "Sir, I don't want to hear your gripe about angsty teen drama from the biggest cruisy supremacist. I will gripe where I wish." Okay, so first off is this. In order to understand this subgenre, urban fantasy is literally no different from regular fantasy other than its setting. Please understand that. That's something that I feel like too many people get too hung up on when it comes to the setting, that the setting determines everything. No. Literally, you have as much freedom as you want in urban fantasy as you would just writing regular old fantasy. Remember this, it's not science fiction. So the advancements or whatnot should be magical in nature that you happen to have. Other than that, what you are and aren't allowed to do are all questions you can toss right out the window. Fantasy is about boundless potential and the chance to tell whatever story you'd like to do with the creativity that you have inside your own brain and heart. Now, this is where many authors cringe and pull back when I say something like this because, again, they are so focused on the setting and its limitations. Because urban fantasy implicitly says that your story is taking place in the modern, real world. And therefore, you are stuck to whatever the modern, real world is doing. That is the limitation that too many authors place on themselves. And while that is a fun limitation to work around, it's a limitation that honestly most authors have such a hard time overcoming that this is one of the reasons why it's always just dystopian and angsty teenage romance dramas that get thrown into these urban fantasy stories. Or even sometimes when the authors got grandiose ideas of angels and demons coming into Chicago to battle it out. No, that's not what's important. What's more important is finding out if Jason is going to ask Susie out to the dance or if he's going to go back to his ex-girlfriend, Jessica. Oh my gosh. Oh, the universe could end, but I care more about the dance. No, I care more about the fact that the fate of the world is dependent on what's happening in Chicago. Yikes. So, while that could be interesting, don't shackle yourself to that. Hey, so Shay has answered the question. I consider Deltarune the same type of fantasy like the American Dragon. I know some of you, I'm so crazy, but listen, I mean, magic and kind of modern world, some part of it is hitting the population. I can't argue it's kind of similar to the life and times of Juniper Lee. Some people, the only thing urban fantasy in real cities, if not, it's not real urban fantasy. I disagree with that. Exactly. Urban fantasy, as I'm actually going to show in a couple of examples, can break away from simply being shackled to real cities. Urban fantasy, again, is more about it's more about just saying my fantasy must be in this particular setting, but otherwise I am free to do what I want. So let's start. So let's proceed. There are two major approaches to urban fantasy. In order to mix the boundless potential of the fantastical world with the modern, or the realistic world of today, there are two overarching means of doing this. One is the hidden world, and the second is the merged world. These are my terms for them. They are not official, but this is the best way that I could describe them. The hidden world. The hidden world means that most humans are blissfully unaware that the fantasy world exists and that they share it on this green earth. The merged world, this is one of my personal favorites. This is where you see how humanity has accepted the fantasy world and it has radically changed the way that the earth looks. So basically, the modern world that we have today is thanks to the fantasy world existing and the magic that it shares with us normal people. So those are the two overarching approaches. And there's other ways that you can spice in this up. I think there's ways that you can even deviate from this, but generally speaking, these are the two major approaches that you will come across. And often it's the hidden world that is utilized and not the merged world, and we will see why that is. Shay says, the main reason why I think Deltarune is urban fantasy is hidden magical part like our own world. I mean, some people consider Star versus the Forces of Evil urban fantasy. Do you agree or not with that? What I will say about Star versus the Forces of Evil is that it draws on urban fantasy for some of the stuff that happens on Earth, but largely Star versus the Forces of Evil is world hopping. It's portal fantasy. Literally, it has portals that allow them to jump from world to world to world. So a lot of Star versus the Forces of Evil, it's a teenage rom-com that is heavily influenced by the tropes and the trappings of a portal fantasy story, with some urban fantasy, with some horror, and with some mystery sprinkled here and there. All right. So let us address the hidden world. When you utilize this approach to modern fantasy, you have to ask yourself these major questions. Why does the fantasy world hide itself? Number two, what does the fantasy world, how does the fantasy world, not why. I'm sorry, I already asked that. I already asked the why. Second question is, how does the fantasy world hide itself? Question number three, what brings the real world and the fantasy world to clash in the protagonist's life? And then fourth, why does the protagonist decide to embrace this new reality of two worlds? So I've got Harry Potter there in the background of this particular slide. Let us consider the Harry Potter story real briefly. So why is the wizarding world in Harry Potter hidden? It's hidden because, as Hagrid said, all the muggles would ask for magic to solve their problems. It would get too convoluted, it would get too crazy, too many problems, wizards back away. But as we learn when Harry goes to Hogwarts over time, the wizards implicitly fear the muggles. And at the same time, they look down on the muggles because the muggles can't use magic. It's a really weird situation. Basically, in many ways, the wizards have withdrawn themselves because they can't understand anyone. They can't understand the muggles. That's a better way of putting it. They can't understand the muggles. And what they can't understand, they fear, they mistrust, and they're scared of what would happen if they shared their magic. And in a way, they're kind of right that the muggles would overreact and get scared by the presence of witches and wizards and all the magical beasts that the wizarding world has. So because of these various reasons, the wizarding world has decided to hide itself from the muggles, from the non-magical world. And they do this by throwing up all kinds of crazy spells. They've got all these kinds of confounding spells to make sure that muggles don't know that what they're looking at is magical. They have aurors there to alter people's memories, as well as a complete squad that goes around and fixes all the magical problems that somehow crop up. They've got special locations that they've poured even more magic into to deter muggles from. And so there's just a lot of magic going around just to confuse the muggles, in order for the muggles to not realize that this other wizarding world is literally in their own backyard. Now, what brings the real world and the fantasy world and the world of Harry Potter to crash? The crashing happens first because Voldemort is like, I hate muggles. Oh, I hated all the time that I spent around them. I was special because I was a wizard. I should lord over the muggles. And Voldemort is very smart. He capitalizes on the fear and the mistrust and the uncertainty and the lack of knowledge that the wizarding world has in regards to the muggles. That he's able to turn all of those emotions and preconceptions into fear and hatred and pride. And this allows him then to gather his followers and go to war against the wizarding world and go to war against the muggles in an attempt to conquer both. And because of that war, it clashes with Harry's family. Harry is attacked, gets cursed and bound to Voldemort. And so he is now connected to the Wizarding World, even though the Wizarding World literally removes him from it and places him amongst muggles. And so Harry is bound to the Wizarding World. As a result, he will be, no matter what, he will be invited to Hogwarts in order to become a wizard if he so chooses. And Harry chooses to embrace this new fantasy world and to embrace a new reality, a reality of wizards and muggles, because he hates the Dursleys and he needs to get out because the Dursleys are honestly awful. And so he's willing to take a leap of faith and go somewhere new. And that is what introduces him into this Wizarding World. And that's why he puts his foot in there. And then he makes real friends. And as a result of having real friends, he has more of a desire and a reason to stay in this new reality with a foot planted firmly in both the Wizarding World and in the Muggle world. So there we have our answers. Obviously, there's so much more that is built up out of Harry Potter, but that right there, those are the basic questions necessary in order to better understand the setting. And from there, we go on. Seems I was forbid the world of Harry Potter to try and interact with the TikTok world. They would be exposed to like 10 years ago at that point. I don't know if the Wizarding World is ready for the modern technology that brings us TikTok and the likes. I want to be an amateur writer here, curious to hear your perspective of the urban fantasy genre. Well, we are going to dive in as much as possible as we can with this live stream. Shade says, what I mean about that we have magical technology Undertale monsters with modern technology. Well, yeah, technology powered by magical means or by a completely different understanding, which is really, really cool. And it's something that if we just put a little bit more thought into as writers, we could come up with some really cool stuff that looks very familiar to the reader or to the viewer, but is obviously powered by a different means or operates by a different mean. Excuse me. And that would be awesome. It's familiar, but it's alien. Ooh. Stormcrow says, consider this. Post-pacifist Undertale world can be considered the merged world of urban fantasy. Now many fanfic authors tackle that concept, sadly. Yeah, I know. I've seen that. A lot of... Because, well, we know that most people are in love with the events of Undertale. As a result, people don't really explore what happens afterwards. Because it's the events of Undertale itself that have captured people's hearts and imagination. I'd say that's the reason why, Stormcrow. Then Shay brings up as other options for urban fantasy a certain magical index, Yu-Gi-Oh, Sailor Moon, Inuyasha. Yeah, I mean Inuyasha is an interesting one because it's technically also portal fantasy, even though it's also time. It's time travel. So Inuyasha is playing around with all different kinds of subgenres, which is cool. So one of the things that actually keeps Inuyasha pretty fresh. Sailor Moon most definitely is urban fantasy. Yu-Gi-Oh does a good job of blending science fiction with fantasy because a lot of it is all technological, but it is powered by a knowledge of ancient magic, and ancient magical schemes are playing out throughout the story. So that's something that's really neat that Yu-Gi-Oh does, how it merges the different subgenres together in order to tell a very unique story. And yeah, sure, card games are a dime a dozen, but Yu-Gi-Oh definitely feels different from so many of them. Hey, Hannah Heaven is here. Great to have you here, Hannah. All right. Hannah says, that's why I'm making a sequel, Undertale comic, focused on Frisk and the human world long monsters. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Hannah's story was actually one that I was trying to think of earlier as I was reading Stormcrow's comment. I was like, wait a second, someone is working on a post canon Undertale story, which yeah, I think that would be a whole lot more fun to explore because there's just so much potential there. Now then, let's have a look at a few other at a few other examples of the hidden world in terms of urban fantasy. I've brought this story up before, and I'll bring it up here again. Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. Yes, I know Neil Gaiman is right now absolutely in the dumpster, deservedly so. But Neverwhere is a fantastic book about a young man in London who comes across this girl that he absolutely shouldn't have. She's on the run. She is from the underground world of London, where there is an entire thriving magical city that people just don't see because people aren't paying close enough attention. If they do, like this young man, then sucks to be them because they get booted from their normal reality and are forced to integrate into this magical world underneath London. And what's neat about Neverwhere's world is that it utilizes all of these empty spaces and even some known spaces within London that, again, people just aren't paying attention to. And what we learn is that these worlds have been separated because one decided to focus more on magic and the other decided to focus way more on technology. And as they have split and gone their separate ways, they can know what they have. Both worlds actually have a hard time truly interacting with the other or even understanding each other, which I think is a really cool element. So that's the how and the why. The protagonist gets involved in this world because he falls for this girl. He's like, oh my gosh, hot chick. I'm going to help out this hot chick. Also, she's the only thing that I know about any of this weird world, so I might as well stick to her or find her if I can, and then stick to her because it's the only thing I understand. Hot chick, hot chick. As a result, this guy gets hurled into the most insane adventures involving all of these schemes, these different cosmic entities, murderers of gods, an angel cast down from heaven because he allowed for Atlantis to sink into the ocean, a warrior who is hunting for the boar who lives under London, and she's willing to do anything to kill this boar that has been going on since the time of the Romans, murdering people. There's this guy who considers himself a king who lives atop a trash heap at the in an abandoned subway car. So many cool things happening in Neverwhere. Really, really great. Really, really great story. And also, I love the way that the main villains get beaten at the end because it's so simple and they absolutely should have seen it coming. But you just get so wrapped up in the story that you don't realize until it's hit you. You're like, so that's how you do it. Really cool. Oh my gosh. Then there is the Mortal Instruments. Oh man. I will. So confession time. I've listened to a lot of this angsty teenage romance story, The Mortal Instruments. Oh, so angsty, so teenager, so horny. Oh my gosh, so angsty. Did I mention it was angsty? Ugh. So the Mortal Instruments is one where is an interesting one where you have the descendants of angels and demons who have inherited special skills. And effectively these descendants are attempting to preserve the natural order of the universe by preventing fallen descendants and fallen angels and demons from enacting a grand scheme that will destroy everything. And they do so by scrawling onto themselves magical symbols that allow them to do cool things. Whoop-de-doo. And they have to fight with axes and swords because guns don't work against these creatures. But ancient weapons do. Huzzah! Because fantasy. Because in fantasy, guns can't work. Yeah, so we'll move aside that little sticky point. The thing is, I listened to quite a bit of it, and pulls you in because like, I want the girl to end up with, I want the girl who's just not like the other girls, who's the outsider, but she's secretly super hot, who's also the daughter of an angel and a witch, to end up with the boy of her dreams, Mr. Blonde Hunk with all his tattoos. Like, you get pulled into it. It works really well. And then the moment that you step back, you're just like, oh my gosh, this is a cool idea. Again, a cool idea of the descendants of angels and demons having to work together to take on like ancient powers and prevent the fall of the world is cool. The implementation thereof is not so cool. Now, this hidden world is hidden because they don't want to freak out normal mortals. That's basically why. There's no repercussions. There's nothing will go wrong if mortals find out. They're just like, I just don't want to deal with mortals finding out that angels and demons exist. Okay, we're moving on. Do. And the main character gets pulled into this because of the blonde hunk. She stays in it because of the blonde hunk. And the only thing that she wants is the blonde hunk. Yeah, she is the daughter of the big bad as well. Thank you, I'm Omega. Oh, that's right. Also because her mom is trying to get together with a werewolf. Other things happening in the story. Yeah. Oh, Mortal Instruments. It's been years since I last attempted to read any of those books. My oldest sister was very much caught up in them. And she's like, isn't this magic system great? And I'm like, it could be better if we learned more about it. The Mortal Instruments is a good example of that. People just use urban fantasy oftentimes as a means of communicating the story that they really want to tell, which is usually angsty teenage romance or dystopian stories. Then we get the Candy Shop War. This is a fun book, and it's the start to a fun series. I've brought this up before, and I'm happy to bring it up again. Written by Brandon Mull. In this one, the hidden world is incredibly small because it's not like there's elves and dragons that are being kept hidden or anything like that. Rather, instead, you have a bunch of witches and wizards who are looking for ancient, powerful artifacts. And if anyone finds out what they're doing, they are in trouble. Because normal people be like, wait, what? You want to have a magical device that would allow you to control our bodies against our will? Oh, none of that. Grab your torch and pitchforks, people. And other witches and wizards be like, how dare you get that power for yourself? I shall kill you to have those powers. And so all the witches and wizards come up with really unique ways of hiding themselves from everyone. And then on top of that is the rule that as we grow older, we tend to believe less and less in magical stuff. So adults have a harder time easily recognizing witches and wizards up front, whereas kids do. And so what the witches and wizards do is the witches and wizards are basically like, hey, little boy, I happen to have all this candy in my van. I will give you the magical candy if you give your parents fudge that will make them forget everything. And I'm not just pulling that out of the thin air. That's actually in the Candy Shop War. Hey, little boys and girls, I'll give you special magical candy if you help me brainwash all of your parents. And because these are little kids who obviously did not internalize the story, the stories and lessons of stranger danger, listen to the witch, and then take all of the brainwashing fudge to their parents and and make their parents absolutely blind to anything magical that's happening. So that way then the town can basically be taken over by a literal war of magic and candy. Okay, so Stormcrow says, wait, you're talking about urban fantasy and yet you dare not talk about Twilight? Shame. Now, here's an interesting thing about Twilight, Stormcrow, because I was thinking about adding it to my obvious list. Twilight is urban fantasy. it is. However, most people would see it first and foremost as a romance story with then like a supernatural element thrown into it. And in a way, this was actually proven by that stupid awful book 50 Shades of Grey, because 50 Shades of Grey is basically just a fanfic of Twilight, and just takes out the magical elements and then adds in, of course, a kink. The thing is that if you remove the kink and you remove the magic from 50 Shades of Grey and Twilight respectively, you end up with effectively the same story. And so the setting just helps again to spice things up. Twilight is urban fantasy, but it's so low on the fantasy and magic aspect to it all that it really is just mostly a romance story. It's an angsty teen romance. Whereas with Mortal Instruments, if we took out the angstiness, you still get this crazy cool cosmic war that's happening in the city. Neverear is all about the craziness of the reverse London, and the candy shop war is just, it's the magic. Woo! Shay says, also Life and Times of Juniper Lee, the Veil basically make magical creatures unseen for normal people. Of course, if normal people have certain items or something special, they can see them. Yes, allowing them to pierce the hidden world. And Omega read the series, The Mortal Instruments, back in middle school. All right. No, Percy Jackson, Undertale, is kind of similar urban fantasy. I mean, they're both. Yeah. So here's the thing. I would say Undertale is definitely not urban fantasy. It is not. It utilizes elements of urban fantasy in some of its settings. But Undertale's ultimately just a fantasy story, adventuring through the underworld, trying to get home, and discovering the lives of all these different monsters along the way, and trying to uncover what's happening. It's almost more mystery than anything else, other than, of course, fantasy. Percy Jackson, on the other hand, is definitely more urban fantasy. I would absolutely agree with that. Now then, this is where we get to my personal favorites. And this is the merged world. I'm just taking a drink of water right there. All right, so the merged world. This is where the fantasy world and the real world have merged and completely influence each other. This approach, however, is more difficult because it requires the author to make sense of how we arrived to a modern world setting that's not very different from our own, while still merging everything that's wondrous from the fantastical, and do it in a way that the audience can follow without a main character like Harry Potter, who's the fish out of water that allows us to ask all the questions and get all the answers. Because a merged urban fantasy world means that everyone's been living this. Why would anyone question this? And so here's where I bring out a great example, and this is something that Shay brought up earlier, that you do not need to have urban fantasy set in real world cities. And one of my best examples I can bring up is Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. I highly recommend this story. If you are interested in the movie Your Name, this is one that you will like. I'm pretty certain that if you like the movie Your Name, you will enjoy Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, because it's a similar setup. In fact, Sanderson said that he was inspired by that movie, where you have these two characters who routinely switch bodies, with a boy going into the girl's body and the girl going into the boy's body. A little bit of gender bending going on here. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter follow follow Yumi, who is a priestess, whose job it is to stack the stones to impress the spirits, so the spirits will grant boons. And Yumi trades places with the Nightmare Painter, who just angstily like, I'm Painter. Ugh, I'm a tortured soul. Painter is a warrior who helps to defend the city from being overcome by nightmares. And the way that they do this is by going around the city and finding these nightmares and then painting stuff for the nightmares. When the nightmares see paintings, they are drawn to these paintings and they start becoming whatever the person has painted, giving the person a chance to either attack the nightmare, take him out, or even better, trap the nightmare in the painting and defeat it. And so that's what Painter does. And so the two of them are now swapping places. Painter has no idea how to stock stones properly, and Yumi does not know what it is to be a painter and take on these nightmares and beat them. And it's a really great story. Again, the urban fantasy ultimately serves more as a setting, but it's such a cool setting. This magical neon Tokyo that's surrounded by a never-ending night. And the way that Brandon Sanderson gets around people not knowing what's going on, and this is something that some people have said really grated on them, but I personally liked it, is that the story is not being told through Yumi or Painter's perspective, but through a narrator who's speaking directly to you, the reader. And so the narrator is constantly talking to you and is being super meta, super fourth wall breaking, sometimes a little patronizing along the way. But the narrator helps fill you in on all the things that you normally wouldn't know. So that way, then, whenever you jump back to the story of Yumi and Painter, you just get whisked along with the great fantasy. And honestly, it's a phenomenal read. I highly recommend it. All right. So Shade says, both stories and many other stories focus on vampires and our world. Guys, you agree or not? I mean, duh, they do. There's just a lot of urban fantasy stories are very obsessed with vampires in our world. Why? Well, because it's very easy to hide vampires in the modern world and not have to worry too much about all the rules that you have to follow. Again, comes back to my gripe. Urban fantasy has become too derivative and too lazy. And I want to see it spiced up, dang it. Stormcrow says, headcanon. The reason Toriel locks her room to prevent Chris from entering, she has an entire collection of Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey. Oh my! Not good church-going Toriel. I could actually absolutely believe it. Amade says, I know no evil isn't probably urban fantasy, but it does have elements of emerged world. And I'm Omega, that is a great, great point to bring up. No Evil, the YouTube series, is a merged fantasy world. And as you go throughout it, like, people realize that there are magical creatures and beings and people, but in some communities they are very far separated from that. And so these people are more like legends than actual individuals. While for others, this is a very real thing that they deal with constantly. And I would agree to a certain extent, I'm Omega, that it doesn't follow urban fantasy because it is set out in a frontier setting. So it's very hard to justify urban fantasy, but it does lean into some urban fantasy tropes. And as a result, that's one of the things that I think helps to make No Evil feel dynamic in a way that it might not otherwise. Because there is something about the way that it's merged the frontier, the American frontier, with all of this all these fantastical elements and these legends of both American and Mesoamerican origin together, that it honestly would not feel out of place in an urban setting. It's just in a frontier setting. And I know that seems like kind of like vague and kind of up there, but effectively you could still have the same story of No Evil set in New York City as you could have in the Frontier. However, it works so beautifully set in that Frontier setting. And so if you took it out of the Frontier and put it into New York City, it would end up feeling very different. But the story could be the same without it really having to alter at all. But setting in the Frontier just works so well for the characters and for what the creator is trying to do with the overall story. So, and that's again where knowing what you're working with, what subgenre you're dealing with, what tropes you have, what tools you have, what expectations there are, allows you then to pick and choose what will be best for your story in order to make your story the best it can be. That is the most important thing. Hey, Arts is here. Hey, guys, just got back from Fantastic Four. Well, that's a statement. I won't know how Fantastic Four is until later. I've promised I will not go and see the movie until my sister Anya comes to visit with her husband, which is still a couple of weeks away. So it'll be a little while before I see it and have an opinion on it. All right. No, Arts, you haven't missed everything. You've just missed, though, about half the lesson. No worries, no worries. Wait till I get to Salem. Ooh, boy. Oh, boy. Salem. Stormcrow says, picture this, an animation sprite of Toriel, empty wine ball surrounding her bed as she reads aloud the spicy scenes with Sans. And yes, Chris hears this. Oof. Oh, that's some great fanfic material. The voice of Galactus is awesome. All right, y'all have a good time? Okay, looking forward to it. Shade says, fun skeleton man will make all the spices. Yeah, Hannah, I agree. Hannah agrees with me. Just oof. All right, let me take another drink of water. Shade says, I mean, we can see urban fantasy like the fights of different worlds. What I mean, like how the old ways interact with the new ways, which one is better, who has the right to choose which way they go. And some urban fantasy definitely tends to go that way. All right, now then, here is my selection of urban fantasy stories that are of the merged world. So again, not the hidden world. The hidden world, so like Twilight is most definitely the hidden world, where the humans are not supposed to know about werewolves and vampires. The merged world, where all of this is together, where everyone knows that that these magical properties exist. They know the history. The magical world has helped the mundane human world to be what it is now. Some good examples of this, I personally argue, are Solo Leveling, Cockcraft, and Cage Murderous Level Up. Cage is the one that's to the far right. Solo Leveling, which I like to call Swolo Leveling, because basically it's just, I don't care if, like, oh my gosh. Okay, quick rant. Solo Leveling is dumb. I only like its world building. It has fascinating world building. It is a stupid story. And the reason why it's a stupid story is because the main character could have solved so many problems so quickly if he had focused on his main goals the moment he started leveling up. I am going to save my mom. Okay then, why then are you getting involved with all of these different guilds? You didn't need to. You are so powerful, you could have already gone off and defeated other dungeons yourself. For crying out loud, things happen because the plot demands it. And the guy gets in along with it all because the plot demands it. He is such a bland... And here's the thing. He starts off as an interesting, dynamic character. And he becomes bland and pathetic and flat 5 episodes in, because it's all about those gains. I must gain levels. Oh, gain levels. These monsters must fight the Smiling King. Swallow. And I haven't even gotten to the end of it yet. The moment where I don't know if you guys have ever watched the YouTube channel Chibi Reviews. Really chill channel, really fun guy. I do like checking him out every now and then. I don't always agree with his takes, but he's such a chill dude. Watching Chibi Reviews lose his mind because he got to the end of solo leveling and everything that he had been hoping for did not happen because, of course, it didn't. All that's happening is the guy is roiding up on levels. It just gets ridiculous. It gets so ridiculous. And Manhwa has a huge problem with understanding how to balance power levels. Manhwa creators have such a hard time with it. I don't know why. And here's the thing. That's coming from a guy who loves OP characters. I love OP characters. But the reason why I have such a hard time with so many high-powered Manhwa characters is because there is never any interesting challenge for them. Just like with the new Superman movie, where Superman can punch his way out of anything. So Superman has to then be challenged with a clone of himself. He has to be challenged spiritually. He has to be challenged mentally. He has to be challenged morally. He has to be challenged societally. As a result, Superman has to struggle in order to prove that he is the best. Too many Manhwa characters don't have to go through that struggle. They just constantly cultivate more and more powers. Swallow! Cage Murderous Level Up and its sequel, The Games Are Murder to Me, is like the exact opposites. Holy cow. But we'll get there. So yes, solo leveling. Horrible story because its main character is awful. But the merged world, the way that urban fantasy is utilized in solo leveling, is legitimately good. Like, it is legitimately good. I have no problems with the world building of solo leveling. I find it fascinating. I really just wish the characters were better. Art says, in all the Superman movies, except the original, he fights a clone of himself or another Kryptonian. Yeah, and see, that's the problem. That's one of the big problems of Superman being so powerful, is that he can always beat everyone else. However, Arts, there is the story, and I really do love this one. It's one of the few Superman stories that I actually do know, and it is Superman versus the Elite, and I really, really enjoyed that one. Not only because it's another great one where Superman has to prove that his way is better and show just how good he is as a person, but Superman gets challenged on so many incredible levels, and the Elite have the power to go toe-to-toe against Superman. The only thing is that because Superman's so OP, that when he decides to cut loose, the Elite never stood a chance, which is part of the story. That's I think, part of the greatness of that story's ultimate message about Superman. Aura farming is truly a part of Deltarune. If you know, you're a real one. Yeah, Chris just sitting there absorbing aura. Let's see here. Steve Tanner wrote, your average Korean fantasy story. I am literally the strongest being in the whole verse. Aura farming for the max when the creator 50-50 gives up before they wrap up the story. Exactly. And I mean, and that's the thing is that plenty of people like that. And if they like that, okay, that's fine. But that's not a good story. And we want to see quality good stories here. Yeah, Des and Chris are aura farming. Hey, ISO is here. Woohoo! Great to have you here, ISO. Yeah, Art's definitely dig it up. There's actually, you'll want to watch the whole movie or read the whole comic to get the full context, but you can easily find the part of Superman versus the Elite on YouTube. And it's fun. Even without its context, you're all like, Oh, I get that. That's actually really good. The art says, though Des the Knight doesn't need aura farming because she's just crazy giving off aura farming. Yeah, no, she is the aura. I also asked, what is the difference between modern fantasy and supernatural fiction? My answer to that, ISO, is that modern fantasy clearly says that you have to be in a modernish setting. Supernatural fiction can happen in any time frame. That's basically the main difference. Shay brings up horror, but here's the thing: is that horror can be in modern fantasy as well as in supernatural fiction. The horror can jump into either one, no problem. Basically, ISO, it's a matter of setting. And as I've been talking about with urban fantasy, that's one of the things that people get so hung up on the setting and the limitations of the setting that kind of dictates that people get lazy when it comes to urban fantasy because they just go to what is tried and true. If I write an angsty teen romance, it will fit very well. And Ars brings up a good one here. Modern fantasy is more based on reality like Final Fantasy 15, or I'd also say Final Fantasy 7, even though Final Fantasy 7 is more advanced. There's something about Final Fantasy 7 that just feels very grounded because of the way that it treats the city. Our sister remember making fun of the party members running around in their convertible. I know. Funny thing is this: I've got a really good friend who she thought she was going to hate Final Fantasy 15, and she ended up really liking it when she played. And she's all like, "Yeah, I went in expecting to hate it," and she's like, "Now, yeah, I just enjoy driving around in the convertible." Stormcast says, "Want to know the Mega Aura will look like? God of Hyperdeath and Roaring Knight couple team up. Every time they attack the player, they viciously make out." Okay. All right, moving on. Copcraft in and of itself is not necessarily the best story, but it's one of the best in terms of like pulling off good like the merged world. And in this case, you have the fantasy world, which springs up in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And you have all of these fantasy creatures and people who then start migrating to the Americas, to Japan, to China, to Korea, and so forth. And you then have investigators. And this is where I actually really like the genius of how they get people, of how they help the audience to understand what's going on, is that Copcraft has a lot of discussion about the law, obviously, because it's cops. Because you have a cop from the fantasy world having to work with the cop from the real world, hunting down criminals who are using magic. And there's all these discussions about, okay, so how does magic then work in the real world? And what kinds of laws do people have to abide by? And why do fantasy creatures or fantasy individuals feel the need to leave their home world and go and mingle with regular mundane humans? And so there's all of these, so there's a lot of really great discussions that help to naturally guide the audience into better understanding this very different world that has now merged our modern Earth with this magical world. Where, yeah, sure, these magical creatures are wielding swords, but for them, their magic is so powerful that, like, where they're like, I'm sorry, when I can move at supersonic speeds, I can just dodge your bullets. Shrug. Which is then why you actually then have like fantasy creatures who would come over to Earth who would like begin experimenting with human technology. I mean, like, okay, but what if we could make guns shoot spells? And so the world is beginning to change in dangerous ways because of this merger. So there's a lot of neat elements to Copcraft. The reason why I don't really like the story is because the characters are very much like Solo Leveling, where they just feel flat. It's not very interesting. But Cage Murderous Level Up, the one that's to the right, this one. This is an interesting one because ultimately I was struggling at first to really label it urban fantasy because you don't realize until way later on that it is urban fantasy. At first, it feels like an isekai. Jump into a video game, go to another world, and in this other world, you can use magic and special items. the main character gets murdered a lot by the girl that you see holding the knife to his neck. And it's definitely a revenge story. It's what we call revenge porn, where it's all about revenge, revenge, revenge. And normally I do not like these kinds of stories. One of the reasons, though, why I really like Cage, Murderous Level Up, is because it does something very different with the revenge plotline. The revenge plotline changes and evolves based on choices that are made and based on relationships that are built that at first you weren't expecting. And so it takes you on a very interesting journey. Now, it becomes urban fantasy, where once it felt like isekai, because as the story progresses, and this is some spoilers if you intend to check out the manhwa, is that as the story progresses, you come to realize that the game, it's not just a game anymore. The game is absolutely influencing what is happening in the real world. Because of this game, you find out that Earth has drastically changed because aliens from all over the universe have plugged into the game as well, and as a result have found out where Earth is. And so interstellar travelers have come to Earth to live on Earth. Because like, hey, humans, what are humans like? Whoop, aliens are now on Earth. Not only that, but there are godly cosmic entities that begin messing around on Earth because of the game. At one point, tens of thousands of humans get possessed by this undead god and stop coming back to Earth. They stop leaving the game because of what's going on. And then when all these people start protesting it, another god starts interfering with them. And so there's all this magic, there's all these monsters and everything that are coming to Earth because of the game. And everyone knows about it. And so many people plug into it that as a result, the game has permeated everyone's lives. And so you can't escape it. If you think that just simply logging out of the game is going to save you, it doesn't. And so as a result, the characters that you see there on the image to the right have to keep plugging into the game to make their way through it. It takes the revenge plot line and really transforms it in a very interesting way. And I've wanted to make a video about it for a while because I did not expect to like this story. Because again, I do not like revenge porn stories. I think they're ridiculous and get overly convoluted. And Cage Murderous Level Up is like a rare gem that does not fall for the repetitive trap and that takes the story in very interesting directions. Okay. Let me catch up with what some of you guys have said right here. Steven Tanner says, American Dragon Jake Long is probably my best understanding of urban fantasy. I have not read American Dragon, so I just don't know the story, unfortunately. Art says, well, it kind of started slow for me. I mean, you can't start 15 pushing your dead card down the road. Art says, yeah, I wasn't the biggest fan of the opening. Shade says, American Dragon is great. Good to see another one once and the greatness. It's kind of like a certain magical index, but we have different factions of police. Art says, a little off topic. I saw a trailer of Zootopia 2, and I swear they were trying to give an anime vibe with the way they presented the trailer. I don't know if I've seen this particular trailer. I'll have to check it out. Chaos, CFFs, the greatest part of bread and circuses makes the bread addictive and the circuses a necessity. Bread and circuses. The way that Rome operated. Shay says, also for Undertale Deltarune theories, I recommend you Sock Muppet channel. You will love it. I think I've heard of the Sock Muppet channel. All right, so moving on. Now then, to wrap up the examples of different urban fantasy stories, I present to you the best of both worlds. Why not combine the merged and the hidden worlds together? And so I present to you Burn the Witch and Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians. So Burn the Witch is most definitely a hidden world circumstance where the people of London have no idea that dragons exist. They have no idea that there's a secret magical world that they can access through special portals. It's and the magical London continues on doing its own thing. However, once you get into magical London, rather than it being like super retrograde, it is all advanced. And it's advanced because of the way that these humans have utilized the powers of the dragons. And it's so dang cool. Tite Kubo, the author for Bleach, absolutely cooked with Burn the Witch. Holy cow. And so, yes, it is absolutely an instance of the hidden world, because you have to know that this world of dragons exists in order to access it. Because otherwise the dragon hunters are constantly on the lookout to make sure that they prevent you from ever learning about the dragons. And until one right old horny bastard gets very interested in the girl that's to the back, one of the witches, and follows her through one of the portals, and then realizes, oh my gosh, there's this other world. But in the same way, but because when he jumps into that other world, it's so well beautifully merged, where it's a London, but modern London operating with dragon power. It's so dang good. And so that's why it's just a perfect example, in my opinion, of merging the hidden world and the merged world together. Is Bleach urban fantasy now? Yes. Yes, it is. Bleach is urban fantasy. In the beginning. The moment that we transition away from Ichigo doing Soul Reaper stuff in the real world, and then he does all of his incursions into the spirit realm by going to the Serete and then to Hueco Mundo, when it does that, it becomes more Portal fantasy at that point. But the first arc of Bleach, 100% urban fantasy. And yeah, Burn the Witch is definitely worth checking out. I really, really enjoyed it, and I just wish that Kubo would hurry up with the next chapter. But yeah. After Kubo dropped the ball with Bleach, I firmly believe that you can't rush this guy for anything, and that he will only release a story when he feels good and ready for it, which is a shame, but I understand. Then we have Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians. This is another great example of putting together the hidden world and the merged world. It's hidden because unless you know that librarians have brainwashed all of us into not realizing that there are multiple magical continents where dinosaurs are alive and where there's talking statues and all this stuff, unless you break the brainwashing of the librarians, you don't know that any of this stuff exists. And the librarians have taken complete control over the modern world that we don't have, that Google can't bring this up, satellites can't bring this up. If you try to sail out to one of these continents, the librarians will manipulate nature in order to deviate you off your course. So the world remains hidden because the librarians deem it so. But should you break the librarians' programming and learn what the world really is, then you come to find out that the world is super advanced. The magical world is super advanced because they have taken modern technology and merged it with magic to basically perform all these kinds of miracles. And it's so dang good. I highly recommend Alcatraz versus Evil Librarians. It is such a fun series. Excuse me. All right. Shaz, I have a question about how making hidden creatures like angels and demons, and they exist in mythology and religion, and we believe in them. Anybody thinks this is stupid? Well, here's the thing. Shade. As far as like making those kinds of creatures hidden within an urban fantasy setting, again, this comes down to the how and the why. It's not stupid if you give a good if you give good reasoning for it. It becomes dumb when you're all like, well, just why don't they? Why don't they? I mean, come on, why not? And that's where the writer has to be like, okay, then. So angels and demons, for example, have certain rules placed on them. They're only allowed to interact with humans based on certain conditions. As a result of that, it's very hard for a human to directly interact with an angel or a demon because of blah, 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 blah. If you as the writer can lay down concrete rules for your story why that works, then it works. If the reader's all like, well, I don't believe any of that, that comes down then to a question of, did the author not write the story well enough that you could not suspend your disbelief, or were you as the reader refusing to suspend your disbelief? This leads actually, I think, to a conversation that needs to be had at a future point in time. What exactly is the suspension of disbelief? The suspension of disbelief is when the audience says, I am willing to embrace your story, no matter how weird or strange it is, because I wish to be entertained. The moment that you do something to betray my trust in your story, that takes me out of what you've invited me into, my suspension of disbelief is broken, and I can no longer see the story as anything other than I can no longer see the story strictly as entertainment. I now have to tear it apart. That is the danger of the suspension of disbelief. That's basically the contract that you enter into as the member of the audience and as the creator. So the creator has to do their job to communicate the story to the best of their ability and do a good job at it to make sure it all makes sense. And then the audience has to be willing to suspend their disbelief. If they can't do that, most stories will not be interesting to them. They just won't be. And I've met plenty of people who can't do that. They refuse to suspend their disbelief. For those who are willing to suspend their disbelief, then it comes down to a matter of, is the story any good? Because if it's bad, it breaks your suspension. If it's good, it maintains it, and you're able to enjoy yourself, usually, throughout the story. Steven Tanner says, just recently saw this Deltarune comic dub called It's Not You, Chris, which I could imagine Noelle would do to Chris in a future Weird Route. Oof. Bleach has a good ending, fight me. Bleach has a horrible ending because it betrays every character. It betrays every character. It makes no sense. Even Kubo's editors were all like, I have no idea how he's going to do this. Kubo himself had no idea how he's going to do it. Kubo even admitted he was rushing it because he just didn't want to write anymore. It's a bad ending. Those were the days, man. Fully Cooley, Cowboy Bebop, Blue Gender, Inuyasha. Good stuff. I have a question to you, like only early Bleach, or this is your favorite? I liked Bleach, and I defended Bleach all the way up to the last chapter. To the very last chapter. And then the last chapter betrayed me on every single count. And I was like, okay. And here's the thing, is that as opposed to me being like, I hate Kubo, like some fans are, I've just been praising Burn the Witch, which he wrote after the fact. Kubo is good when he's on point. When he's not on point, oh boy, it's a disaster. Stormcrow says, need to sleep, folks. Happy to be here, Lars. Question for all of you to consider. Is what Toriel did at the end of Chapter 4 objectively a terrible thing, or are we blowing that whole moment too hard? Stormcrow, I'm just going to say this. It's complicated. It's complicated. I wouldn't fault Toriel for wanting to have a good time. I wouldn't fault Toriel if she's got a crush on Sans, or she's just wanting to hang out with a friend. Whatever it is that she's doing. At the same time, here's the thing, is that it was wrong for her to skip out on choir practice without letting her kid know what was going on. And she shouldn't have allowed herself to get so zoused when quite obviously there's a lot happening that particular weekend. That's just a bad choice. And because of the way that she seemingly holds up other people to kind of a high standard, especially Rudy, it's hypocritical. But at the same time, it's understandable. And so it's a convoluted, nuanced situation. And I think there's a lot to say about it. But that's just my immediate take. Art says, never got through going through the Dead World arc. And Arts, I can understand that. Especially because again, like, it's a radical change. The first arc of Bleach delivers a very different story from everything else that happens. And I remember when I first was watching Bleach, it took a lot for me to at first come to terms with the fact that the story had changed so radically. Oh, hey, TV account is here. TV says, I'm sorry, what I missed. TV account, you've missed a lot of the lesson. But don't you worry. It's going to remain up here on YouTube, so you can always go back and you can check it out. But it's great to have you here. Shay says, I mean, half of them people, if you did anything, I'm scientific 100% realistic for a creature society, they lose, and the other half, you broke the ship. Sometimes you need to do that if you're doing a meter narrative like Undertale. And yes, there's a narrative. If you disagree, give up writing and give me your money. Top 10 anime betrayal, decide the time and place where we were going to fight for Bleach. Oh, I've already stated my thing. I even have an entire video that has about the ending of Bleach, or at least one aspect of the ending of Bleach that I'm like, okay, I just got to get this on out here. And it's amazing how many thousands of people have commented one way or the other on that video. That video is so low effort. It is so low effort, and yet it is one of the most watched videos on this channel because so many people are still wrestling with the way that Bleach ended. Art says, I enjoyed Bleach, but the Rescue Rukia arc was too long. Yeah, because Kubo's like, now let me introduce you to all these characters. All right. So here is your writing challenge. If you're going to write an urban fantasy novel, what would you do? Are you going to use the hidden world? Are you going to use the merged world? Or are you going to use a little bit of both? What story are you telling that will complement the potential of an urban fantasy? And then write some of the world building and an outline for that story and share it with us. You can either share it with us over at our Discord if you're a member of our Discord, or here in the comments of any one of our videos. I'd absolutely love to see what any one of you are thinking of when it comes to writing your own urban fantasy story. Anthony Dixon says, hello, Lars. Well, hello to you, Anthony. Great to have you here. Now then, as far as my writing goes, as far as like urban fantasy, I don't, as of yet, have an urban fantasy story. I actually do have one planned for that I intend to write later, and I'll tell you guys a little bit about it. This will be an example of both, where it will use the hidden world and the merged world concepts. The hidden world, because for those of you who have read some of my other books, whether it be Monarch Mercenaries or The Legend of the Ten Lords, you will know about my concept of the realms of imagination. Ooh, the parallel universe where all of our thoughts, dreams, nightmares, passing fancies, daydreams all spill into and take on real life. There are people who, when they fall asleep, can cross over to this other universe, but not many of them. My urban fantasy story that I want to tell is of when the realms of imagination start getting pulled into the real world in various ways, and all these other things begin to happen. And so it's a hidden world that is now being forcibly merged into our own. And I wrote back in the very early days of Camille's Harem, I wrote a series of really poorly done stories called the Q Files, which was basically me dipping my toes into that concept. That is the one time I've really written urban fantasy. And it was basically a riff on the X-Files. So like using the X-Files as kind of a medium by which I could then explore how I would bring together the real world and my fantasy world together. Han says, I don't know for sure if my work is going to be both. I still consider the merged world. Well, Hannah, I definitely think that in your case of the Undertale fanfic, it's definitely the merged world is what I would label it as. And that's absolutely A-okay. I think that's a good choice. So Actually, you know what? Let me see. Let me see if the internet has absolutely devoured my old horrible stories. Oh, let's see here. What was that? Let's see here. Wattpad. Back in the day. Back in the day of Wattpad. I haven't posted on Wattpad in years. And it looks like Wattpad devoured them. I don't know if they're still up. My guess would be that they aren't. So yeah, I think the Q files has long since been disappeared. I would have to go hunting and see if I still even have some of those old stories. Yeah, because it looks like it's absolutely gone. Oh well. Just because something does end up, that's one of the crazy things. Just because something is on the internet doesn't mean that it will always be up forever or that it's readily findable. I think that's an important thing. Like those books, those stories might still be out there somewhere, but I don't know how easily they would be found. That my favorite ship didn't happen. Actually, Shade, as I bring up in my video about Ichiruki, I'd be fine with it. Honestly, I'd be fine. In fact, actually, I shipped Ichigo and Orihime before I shipped Ichigo and Rukia. Yeah, absolutely did. And I think Ichigo and Orihime could be a really cute couple. The only problem is that Kubo did not develop Orihime's character. And when people say they do, I'm like, beyond 3 chapters. Beyond 3 chapters. I can point to you the moments where we see Orihime's character growth, and I put that in quotation marks. The reason why I ended up shipping Ichigo and Rukia more than Ichigo and Orihime was because Rukia had character development. Orihime did not. It took Orihime until the Hueco Mundo arc to start showing any sort of character development growth. She then showed a little bit more during the Fullbringer arc, and she shows a little bit more during the 1,000-Year Blood War, and then she gets laid out in the final fight with Bach. Oh my gosh. I've even taken those chapters and I've shown them to people. I'm just be like, okay, then. I'm like, please tell me, please just tell me that I'm misunderstanding. Does she contribute anything here? And I've had people like, no. Other people have no concept of what's going on. I'm just like, just please tell me that Orihime does something in the story, please, please. And they're like, they read through Bleach and they're like, no, Orihime does nothing. And I'm like, yeah. And it sucks. It sucks. Because she could have been a great character. He did the exact same thing to Chad. He did the same thing to Uryu in the arc where we were supposed to learn more about Uryu. Kubo could not commit to his original characters beyond Ichigo and Rukia. As a result, Ichigo and Rukia ended up just having better chemistry, even though that was never the intention. And as a result, that's why a lot of people shipped them. But even beyond that, just the way that Bach goes out makes no sense. It was pulled out of the ether. Ooh, Aizen appears. Just discombobulate Bach for a couple of seconds, giving not Ichigo, but giving freaking Renji of all people the chance to land a distracting blow. So that way Uryu could shoot Bach and then Ichigo could finish him off with the original Zangetsu. Because character development doesn't matter anymore. Oh. Freaking Sarite goes backwards. Bringing back the stupid council of 46. Oh, so many dumb things. So many things that should have been resolved with Kisuke that never were. Foreshadowing that Kubo absolutely disregarded. Canceling the fight with Kenpachi? Oh my gosh. Freaking forgot Kenpachi. More people were angry because Kenpachi got forgotten. Minaguta. Or says it's okay, Lars. Yeah. Steven Tanner says, I've learned that too many characters is a drag down for your story. It can be if you're unable to give all the characters proper space within the story to develop. So life happens, and so does bad writing. Yes, it happens. It even happens to the best of us. A good example, Steven Tanner, of being able to balance all these characters is The Wheel of Time. If you are willing to give all 14 books the time necessary to read through them, it is amazing how every character matters in the end. I was like, there's no way. There's literally no way that Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson can pull this off. And they did. Wow. The Wheel of Time is probably the only story, to my knowledge, that truly gives all of its amazing, expansive cast, character arcs, moments to shine, great conclusions. Wow. I mean, there are things that I still didn't like about the end, but that was just me. That was honestly my quibbles. From an objective perspective, The Wheel of Time does just an amazing job, considering how vast its cast is. The cast of The Wheel of Time is larger than the cast of main characters across Greek mythology. Holy dang. So, yeah, Wheel of Time. Definitely recommend that for being able to balance huge casts. But now, Wheel of Time. Don't watch the show. The show is not the books. Holy cow. The books do way better. Yes, 14 books. It's massive. It's really massive. Oh my gosh. In any case, coming back to the question that I started off with at the beginning of the stream. Is Deltarune urban fantasy? Now that we've talked about the hidden world, the merged world, how a story can borrow elements from different subgenres and niches in order to tell the story that it wants to tell, can Deltarune be classified as an urban fantasy, or is it just simply borrowing elements of urban fantasy? I'll give you guys a chance to think about that into comments, and I gotta let a cat out to eat. There we go. Cat left out to eat. Trash TV adaptation, I've heard. Yes, and I agree with Jade. Yes, the adaptation was trash. I actually did want to watch the whole series, but here's the thing: my favorite character in the series is Avienda, and when I found out what they were going to do to Avienda, I just couldn't anymore. I freaking love Avienda. She's such a cool character. She's so much fun. And like she's such a fish out of water. She's so cool. She could take me and bend me into a pretzel. Very powerful when it comes to magic. Absolutely devoted to Rand in just the most innocent way possible. And my and it's hard to also get over the fact that one of the way that Rand discovers an ancient spell, or I say rediscovers an ancient spell because he's boinking her, and apparently the boink is so good that when he climaxes, he casts amazing magic. It's one of the most ridiculous moments, but it's so hilarious. And then Avienda's like, you transported us into the Arctic and we're both naked. He's like, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. She's like, oh my gosh, build an igloo. It's like, how do you know what igloos are? I might have been born in a desert, Rand, but even I know how to read books. Freaking love Avienda. So, Omega says that Deltarune is a suburban fantasy, super tiny fantasy, says Shade. It's a mix of different fantasies, in my opinion, but it does lean urban quite a bit, says Ars. And I have to agree that it's absolutely like a suburban, close to rural. I'd probably say it's more of a rural setting, but it absolutely draws on a lot of urban fantasy feels and tropes. The idea of the hidden worlds and the way that the hidden fantasy world mirrors or is connected to a lot of the events happening in the small town, and how they come to influence the small town, how it influences your understanding of hometown, your interactions with the other characters, the friendships that you're trying to develop, and everything, has a very classic urban fantasy feel to it. Its setting is not urban, which, when we come to splitting hairs, is probably where people would come down and say it's not urban fantasy. But because it utilizes so many urban fantasy tropes to it, I feel like ultimately Deltarune could kind of sit up there with other urban fantasy stories. And I genuinely feel like Toby Fox, even if he himself didn't research all of these different aspects and everything, I feel like this is something that he, to a certain degree, does know. And that he's like, you know what? I don't want to set Deltarune in a city because it doesn't fit what I want to do with some of the characters, with the feel and everything, how close-knit the community is. It's hard to do that within a city. So I'm going to do it in a more rural setting. But I really like the tropes of the urban fantasy subgenre, and I'm going to utilize those. And I feel like that's the way that Toby Fox approached the setup and the world building for Deltarune. Steven Tanner says, I'm waiting for a moment when it's revealed that every important Lightener in hometown was in on the soul. Possessing Chris was a plan to complete the prophecy so that they don't all die. Talk about your choices don't matter. Steven Tanner, you and I are thinking along the same lines. Because, I definitely want to elaborate on this more in a future video. But I think that everyone, I'd say that everyone, but I do feel like a lot of people were in on what happened with Des. I think that, for instance, when Undyne gets taken to the bunker at the end of chapter 3, I don't think that Des / the Knight is the one who took her. I think that the Knight dragged Undyne out into the open, where others then took Undyne and raced on over to the shelter. I think that that's more likely what happened. Because while it sounds really cool that the Knight could then step out into the dark world and then just haul Undyne by herself down to the shelter, that sounds really, really cool. Based on the world building that we've been given, it's hard to justify that as the scenario. Because the moment that you step out of the dark world into the light world, you lose those Darkner powers. You lose that Darkner look, which would then mean that Des, in order to drag off Undyne by herself, and with whatever has happened to her, Des would have to basically be a hulking 10-foot reindeer muscular girl and sprinting away with Undyne. And now look, I'm all into muscular girls, but that just does not sound like what most likely happened to Des. So I think it's far more likely that individuals who are in on this conspiracy to complete the prophecy. And I think it's ultimately in part to save Des. I think that Carol and Chris are working together to save Des. As twisted as their means have been thus far, I think it's actually meant, honestly, for a good purpose. But yeah, there's a whole lot more happening. Now then, that's just right now my current working theory. I am playing through the game again, and I'm going to be looking for even more details in order to see if such a theory can be substantiated, or if that's just me spinning out straw from golden ether. Steven says, aren't humans and monsters part of the same society now, segregated but maybe still together? We don't fully know. And I would say that it's far more likely that humans and monsters are more integrated, and that it's hometown being so isolated where humans are not the norm. I think that's far more likely the chance. Shane says it technically the reverse of Undertale. There are choices. There, your choices matter. And in the beginning of Undertale is killed, OP killed. Maybe Deltarune will be the reverse. Your choices truly do not matter. I think that our choices absolutely do matter in Deltarune. But rather it is that because of what other people are doing throughout the game, characters that we have no control over. We know that there is some sort of plot going on, at least between Chris and Carol, and it's very likely between other people as well, that as a result, no matter what you choose to do, others are making their choices to fulfill the prophecy, and as a result, you can't stop it. And as we've seen with Chris is very much plugged into all of this. And so because of that, because Chris is plugged into this conspiracy one way or the other, whether it be through the weird route or you're playing just neutral or pacifist, remember that at the end of chapter 4, Chris is told, you made a promise. Chris is bound into whatever this is. And I think that Chris is trying to find a way out, especially with Susie now being in the mix. But even if Chris decides to go against everyone else, it's everyone else. And Chris is just a kid at the end of the day. We'll just have to see what happens. R says, unless the Dark World changed her enough to allow her to exist in both worlds in her current form, referring to Des. That is possible. We just don't know enough about that to say for certain. Again, just kind of going off of what we've currently been told about the world building, it's hard to justify that. Hey, so we've got Far HD says, YouTube randomly recommended me this stream. I am honestly surprised that Deltarune is being examined in an academic-like way. I'm going to be sticking around as I have never heard of urban fantasy before. Well, Far HD, thank you for popping on in, and we hope that you enjoyed this conversation. Unfortunately, you've missed a lot of the breaking down of what urban fantasy is, but I'll quickly do a recap right here. So, urban fantasy is a subgenre of fantasy, and it specifically asks, what would it be like if a fantasy world could interact with our modern real world? What would that look like? And there's two different ways that you can go. You can do the hidden world, or you can do the merged world. The hidden world is where the fantasy world remains hidden from normal people for various reasons. And it requires you to reach certain qualifications or to do something, to get cursed, whatever it be, in order then for you to see and interact with this fantasy world. If it's the merged world is that everyone knows that magic in this fantasy world exists. In fact, they are the reason why we've actually reached the modern world as we know it. However, because of that, the modern world looks very different and yet feels similar to what we could observe around us right now in 2025. That's basically your two approaches. Most creators have a hard time justifying a very similar but obviously different modern world. So most authors, most creators do not do the merged world route because it just requires so much more work and explanation, and they might easily lose members of the audience. Whereas with the hidden world, you can have your fish out of water main character who's like, what's going on here? Wow. And then the characters of the fantastical hidden world can then explain things to them, and they learn as the audience gets to learn alongside them as they go through the adventure and so forth. And Deltarune definitely makes use of the hidden world. It's not a merged world setting, though there are some merged world elements that are now coming to the forefront in chapters 3 and 4 as the knight is now personally getting involved in events. And we are questioning whether or not the knight, very likely Des, has been so changed by the dark world that the knight is able to still manifest herself in the light world, or if it isn't that other people are working together with Carol and Chris, for instance, to kidnap Undyne, that the knight dragged Undyne to the door, hurls Undyne out, and then others grab Undyne and then race off to the shelter. We don't fully know yet. I'm personally of the opinion that I think other people are definitely in on the plot and are working together with Chris, with the knight, and with Carol to bring to pass the prophecy. To what end? I personally think it's all to save Des. And as a result, the people who are working to save Des are both unwittingly and willingly working towards the destruction of the world. So there you have it. Steven Tanner says, the game goes out of its way to say that your choices do really matter. Try playing Deltarune with no eggs or shadow crystals. Then you get the your choice don't matter ending. Humans and monsters equal merge. The dark world equals the hidden world. Yeah, so there's definitely the aspect of the fantastical where humans and monsters can exist together in the same world. And in that instance, I would say yes, it definitely has the merged world aspect. Though some of the fun of Deltarune is that Deltarune treats the humans and monsters living alongside each other as just, of course this could happen. So much so that you very easily just accept it, even though we know that the monsters of Hometown are saying that they're not used to Chris being around is false, because Chris has been there now for years. And I think that there's even evidence to suggest that there were other humans, or at least one other human in Hometown earlier, that have allowed monsters to get accustomed to humans. And for instance, have allowed Gerson to write about how to raise humans. I mean, why would this guy write? I mean, Gerson seems like a very honest, straightforward guy in terms of teaching people, that it's like, wait a second, why would Gerson just simply lie? Be like, I think this is how you raise a human. I think it's very likely that Gerson was a part of raising a human in Hometown years and years before and wrote about it. And so because of that, because of the way that things are just treated as fact in the light world, it definitely has that merged world feel to it. But Deltarune treats it as, this is just fact. This is the way that it works. And so it really focuses more on the hidden world, meaning, as you said right there, Steve, in the dark world, that this is the world of fantasy that we are exploring. Because so far with Hometown, we haven't really been able to explore Hometown beyond the drama that is being built up for us. Now then, let's see here. There was something else, because I just had an idea. It's now slipped my tongue. Dang, I'm going to take a quick drink of water and hope it comes back to me. It's summertime. Keep yourselves well hydrated. Darn. The idea isn't coming back to me. So I'll just discard it for now. Maybe it'll come around. Maybe it'll come around later, for a future live stream or for a future video. Could someone tell me what this crown experience is in the live stream? Don't know. I just see the crowns. The crowns are there, and I don't mind seeing the crowns. All right, so that's basically been what I had planned for tonight. I now need to get around to actually eating dinner because I haven't had the chance to do that yet, and I'm feeling a little bit hungry, as well as it's time to get back to doing some writing and prepping some videos for the weekend because again I'll be out of town celebrating a friend's birthday. So unfortunately, that's again why the stream was on Friday as usual. But yeah, we'll probably return to our usual broadcast schedule next week. And with this week's lesson about urban fantasy being concluded, that honestly that kind of leaves us open now for any other particular lessons or topics that you guys would be interested in. Chaos says, according to the question mark, it's just amount of chat and sub chats. Okay. Interesting. So if you guys have any desires for future live stream topics and the likes, now's a good time to get those on out there so I can make a note of them and then make preparations for the future. And I am hoping that I'll be able to dedicate a good amount of time to doing my Chapter 3 analysis of Deltarune here really, really soon. I've managed to play all the way through it again, and I now have all of my own footage. Oh boy, I am ready. I'd be very interested in vampires. Okay, so actually, please just research Tsukihime. I have like a Tsukihime. I'm thinking though, Shay, because I did promise more than a year ago that I would do something about vampires. I'm saving the vampires talk for the month of Halloween. Baleful polymorphs or mini boss teams. Omega, what do you mean about mini boss teams? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Why you want me to talk about that? TV Count, what about finishing projects in light of recent internet history and people who failed to finish their projects? Okay, TV Count, that's an interesting one right there. So could I recommend something like how to keep your story from becoming a mess of unnecessary events? Ah, yes, that is an excellent recommendation and absolutely something that needs to be talked about because holy cow, I have been there. That's sometimes what my first book feels like. Farishi says, I think taking a look at Gerson's dialogue during a secret fight may be worthwhile. Oh, yes, Farishi. I've been working on a script about that. I'm not sure when that particular video will come on out, but oh yes, Gerson really, he unlocks all kinds of interesting questions with his dialogue. Shay says bloodline, family inheritance, magic superpowers, world building, disease. Omega, like a group of smaller antagonists or a team you fight one at a time. Okay. So I'm Omega. I'm actually so this actually would be a very interesting topic to get into. So I'm Omega. I am right now part of a D&D campaign where the Dungeon Master has allowed the players at certain times to kind of insert themselves a little bit more into the story, kind of take over as like mini DMs to do mini arcs. And a mini boss team is actually one of the things that I've been thinking of when the Dungeon Master reached out to me and said, hey, I was thinking that you might do an arc. And I'm like, I already know what I want to do because I've got some antagonists in one character's background that kind of need to be dealt with. They are definitely nowhere near end boss material. Absolutely not. But holy dang, I can make them absolutely vile and despicable. And many times it's actually the smaller bosses that could end up being the most fun to throw at your protagonist. I have a question. Did anybody ever to see the world? I've gone all around the world. I've seen it. Quite nice. Steven says, how to handle a global adventure story. A group of adventurers travel the world in search of the mythical. Like trying to find Atlantis? Okay, man, we've got a lot of really, really good. We got a lot of really, really good suggestions here. So I will have to be making a list based off of what you guys have all put here, and we're gonna have we're gonna have a good long line of lessons, I hope, based off of your guys's recommendations. I'm so excited. So let's see here. Starting a family in another world. Are there tips to making writing not boring? Now that is always the trick. Hannah, like that's an excellent topic for a future lesson, and I will definitely dive more into that. But what I will say already right off the bat is that making a story not boring is subjective. Just today I was editing a chapter for one of my books, and I know for a fact that this chapter that I'd written is going to make some people just yawn and roll their eyes because there's no big action going on here. How does this advance the plots? Because it's incredibly character focused, and it's character focused for a side character. But even I, as the author, knowing what's going on, found myself riveted to the page because I managed to make it feel so raw. But now then, that's one way of making a story interesting and engaging with raw emotion. Sometimes it's through action. Sometimes it's through dialogue. Sometimes it's just through the quick pacing. Sometimes it's through the humor. There's multiple ways that we can approach making a story not feel boring. And so just know that there's no one right way of doing it. And on top of that, you might have written an amazing action-packed scene or an amazing heartfelt scene or an amazing quick scene or funny scene, and someone out there will still find it boring because it's subjective. So don't feel like, oh my gosh, I might write a scene that someone's going to hate. Rather, instead, focus on making it a good moment, a good chapter, a good scene. And that just comes down to knowing the mechanics, knowing your story, and I think that you will be able to surprise yourself with making something look really, really good. FarHD says another thing you could maybe look at is the set in stone thing in relation to the prophecy. No matter how many times you shatter the glass. Yes, fate versus choice. That is a fun topic. And depending on what you decide to do with it in a story, like when you bring up something like that, oh man, it can either be really impactful to the audience or it can be a massive eye roll, depending on how you execute it. So that could definitely be a very fun topic. Using tournaments as a timer rather than the main focus. Man. I like that. I'm Omega. I really, really like that one. Hannah says, I just find waiting boring, and I want to have fun to gain a spark to feel motivated. I mean, we've all been there, Hannah. We've all been there. I would say this, Hannah, if you're looking for some fun that's going to motivate you to write, I mean, I just did release my newest book, The White Snake. I think that's a great read. But also, you can check out some of the other stories that I that I recommended earlier. So, Burn the Witch is available. Excellent read. Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians is so dang good, and it is laugh out loud funny. It's really, really good stuff that can inspire you. Yumi the Nightmare Painter, beautiful read, very inspiring. Candy Shop War, Neverear, excellent stuff. If you're looking for something to watch, and this is going to sound silly, I know it's going to sound silly, but spend some time relaxing and watching the Great British Baking Show on Netflix, if you have Netflix. Honestly, it's amazing when you just sit back and enjoy what these people are doing because they get so creative. One of the reasons why I wrote a Cruzy fanfic where Chris and Susie are doing baking was because I was watching the Great British Baking Show. I was like, what if you made a chocolate bomb that was like this? And so I decided to write that. And boom, it was the impetus for a fan fiction. But sometimes just relaxing and enjoying something else is really, really good at sparking that motivation. Going out and having fun is also a good way of just recuperating, regenerating, and go for it. Those are my suggestions. Excuse me. All right. So with all that being said, guys, again, thank you so much for all of your recommendations right here. I'm going to take these all down, and I'm going to be writing out a long list, and I'm going to start prepping lessons for you guys in the future. And of course, there'll be a lot more to talk about when it comes to Deltarune and just to writing in general. Also, actually, I think that I have. And that's it's right here. Also, I'm just gonna recommend this for you guys because this will probably be the next video that I work on. Holy cow! The dealing with the Mikodona sisters is a breeze. Is such a fun anime, for crying out loud. I've been having a blast. I've loved the manga. I've been loving the anime. This is one of the few stories that actually pulls off a harem really well. But beyond that, it's just so cute and so wholesome. So highly, highly recommend it. But in any case, yeah. So that's all for tonight, folks. I need to get around to eating dinner. It is a late dinner for me. Thank you so much for all of you for joining me tonight or this morning, this day, wherever you are at. Thank you for all of your comments and your suggestions and everything. I am so looking forward to more writing lessons and adventures with all of you guys in the near future. So until the next video, y'all, until then, I bid thee all, tschüss.